This happened when I was out with some friends of mine, just off the coast of Washington. My friend Todd had this really cool boat. I honestly don't know enough about boats to tell you what kind it was, or what you would call it even, but it was a fairly decent-sized vessel. It was large enough for the 5 of us to be more than comfortable. It had an inner chamber with a small kitchen, bathroom, and even bunks to sleep on as well. Quite a nice thing all in all. Now Todd really liked being out on the ocean because he felt it was the freest place a person could be. He would often drive out to international waters to explore. I could never really understand his desire to do that. Not only was he getting way too far away from the shore, scary to me already, but I'd heard that in international waters, there were pretty much not any laws at all. Now, whether or not that's actually true, I don't really know enough to say. I also didn't ask because I didn't want Todd to think I was a moron. Later in the day on this outing, Todd was getting the itch, so to speak, to go out and explore further away from the coast. I made some mild objections, but didn't really want to appear like a big wuss in front of my buddies. I didn't object too strongly because of this. For the most part, I thought Todd knew what he was doing. I was a complete novice when it came to anything out in the water, so better to trust him instead of trying my own stuff. We had been cruising along for quite a long time. Despite my initial fear, I was now sitting up front on the ship and enjoying the amazing view. The ocean was so enormous. Thinking about how large it was made me feel dizzy, but it was pretty awesome. It had been a while since we'd seen anything but water though. While I was sitting there watching, I did notice something seemingly moving up in the distance. Immediately, I called Todd's attention over to it. He told me it was just another boat and not to worry about it. Probably just some other people doing the exact same thing we were doing. He then, though, had the genius idea to go up to them and see what they were up to. I was absolutely against this. I had no problem indicating so to Todd. However, he just brushed me off immediately. It was his boat and he was going to do what he wanted to do. So we slowly headed off in the direction of that boat. Little by little, we came closer and closer to the ship. Todd was going fairly slowly, I guess so as to not surprise them. They hadn't really indicated they had seen us though. As we got closer, I noticed this boat was not nearly as nice as Todd's was. It was about the same size and looked like it had an inside compartment as well, but we didn't see anybody on deck. It was not moving either. Now, you'll have to forgive me again if you're a boating person. As I mentioned before, I don't really know much. For me, all I know is turn the boat on and it goes vroom. When the boat gave no indication that it was aware we were there, and because it seemed like it was adrift, Todd got a bit more cautious. He tried to radio in to the other boat, but he got no response from them. He was quite worried now that something must be wrong. We approached the boat carefully. We kept a decent distance though, because the last thing any of us wanted was a collision. Todd knew what he was doing, thankfully, as he maneuvered us a bit closer. I have to admit, this was a bit of a rush. I was worried that something bad had happened to whoever was on the boat, but the mystery of this all was so exciting. When we were very, very close, where we would have communicated verbally if someone was there, I started to notice some movement. Suddenly, a very short man came sprinting out on deck. He was the gnarliest looking man I'd ever seen, dressed in ragged clothes and a long scraggly beard. He also only had one arm. He was holding a knife in his hand, and he was covered in blood. The little man began to scream at us. "Come closer, you fuckers, so I can slice you up." He yelled some other obscenities too. Alarmed, I jumped back. When I did, I saw another man come onto deck. He was much larger than the other guy, and he was carrying a gun. He had a much different message for us than the dwarf. He pointed the gun at us and commanded, "You turn the fuck around!" The dwarf ran over to the wheel and started the engine, looking over at Todd as he did so. I don't think Todd needed to be told twice. He turned the boat around and we sped off. Fortunately, even though it seemed the smaller man wanted to come after us, Todd's boat was faster and we lost them very quickly. He didn't slow down until the boat was completely out of sight and we saw the land again. I'm not entirely sure what to think about what happened. Todd was freaked out, but later he told me he thought it might have been a joke. I was shocked and asked him how he could have possibly come to that conclusion. He then told me if he had looked like a pirate and was in a boat in the middle of nowhere and had seen a group of people like us, he would have played a similar prank. I don't think that's the case though. It really scared the crap out of me at least. I'm a fisherman from Long Island. My boat is not huge and I'm not full-time either. I would never be able to make a living off of what I catch alone. I do make a little bit of money off of it though, and wouldn't stop doing it for the world. That's because I just really enjoy it. I had a really weird experience a few years ago, however, that made me a little bit hesitant to venture out for a couple of days. I had a bad case of Murphy's Law, which led to me experiencing something pretty chilling. I went out fishing with my buddy Dan. I need at least one other person to man the boat with me. We had gone out pretty far, because, well, you have to if you really want to catch anything good. The water around New York, other than being terribly polluted in certain areas, just isn't rich in fish until you stray pretty far out. The first thing that went wrong? We kept on having problems with our equipment the entire day. That should have been a warning signal to us that this wasn't going to work out. Rather, we just treated it as a challenge, though. The second thing that went wrong is the fish weren't biting at all. And I mean at all. It was one of the worst days I've ever had. You'd think we would have given up and gone home, but we were already going this far, so we had to keep trying. We stayed out longer than we ever had before. We decided that once the sun began setting without a single bite all day long, we needed to head back in for the night. That's when the third thing went wrong, of course. The damn engine on my boat broke down. We tried to fix it, or at least fiddle around with it as it were, but there wasn't a whole lot we could do. We had to radio in for help. Yeah, can you see where this is going? Fourth thing that went wrong, our radio immediately went on the fritz. Just one thing after the other. The sunset was beautiful, but it didn't last long enough for my taste. We were now adrift in the middle of the ocean, with no way of contacting anyone. I sent out an SOS signal, and at least that was working. I didn't get a reply though, so that was pretty discouraging. With the darkness came the cold as well. We could go into the boat, but because we were adrift, we couldn't just stay under and wait. We had to be on deck long enough to tell what was going on. It wouldn't do to have a big ship come along and crush us, or even a smaller, less friendly boat coming by without us knowing. Plus, the possibility of hitting anything was terrifying. At one point though, it was just so cold that Dan and I both had to go below deck to get warmed up for a few moments. My lights were working fine still, thank God. Then something happened though. The entire boat shook, and there was a huge noise as if we just collided with something. I immediately cursed at myself for staying below deck for too long. Of course, this was the day something like this would happen. The cracking sound and reverberation of the hit wasn't severe, so more than likely it was just something like a buoy. Even a buoy though could cause enough damage to sink a smaller boat. Even worse though, immediately after the collision, all lights in the boat and on deck shut off. If you've never experienced pitch dark away from a city, you won't be able to understand what happened. It was completely dark. You couldn't see a single thing. Dan and I immediately shot up and knocked some things over. Fortunately, we were able to stumble around until we found the flashlight. Once we could see a bit, I told Dan to grab the lantern, get it lit, and meet me up on deck. I had to run up to see if we had hit something. I sprinted onto the deck and immediately froze when I saw something I cannot explain to this day. Standing on the bow of the ship was a person, an honest-to-God person. He was dressed like a fisherman as far as I could tell, but even with the flashlight shining on him, I could barely make him out. I could tell the man was looking at me, but he wasn't doing anything. He just stood there staring. Dan ran up behind me with the lantern. As he did, he saw the figure standing there too. He dropped the lantern as he yelled out in surprise. The lantern went out, and now we only had the light of the flashlight to go by. I tried to call out to the strange man, but as I opened my mouth, he leaned backwards and fell off the bow of the ship and into the water. Dan and I were terrified. We ran to the bow and tried to look over, but it was so dark we couldn't see anything in the water. We yelled for the man, trying to get him to communicate with us so we could save him, but there was no response. About 10 minutes after the man fell off the boat, the lights came back on. Not only that, but the engine also started working again, and so did our radio. We used the spotlights to search in the water, but we were still unable to find the man. There were no other boats, no buoys, and the man was nowhere to be seen. We drove the boat back to shore, and when we inspected it, there was no indication we'd hit anything at all. I really can't explain what happened that night. I can't even begin to speculate on what it was. I do know, though, that it was the scariest experience of my life. I don't really know if the people who read this story will find it particularly scary, but it was pretty terrifying when it happened. I guess all I can ask is that you use your imagination and try to imagine what it would be like if this happened to you on a boat in the middle of an ocean. I have a decent-sized boat, not particularly large, actually more of a small fishing vessel. I never used it for that though. I basically only bought it because it was cheap and served my purposes. My purposes being that I wanted to be able to spend time on the ocean with my wife. My wife and I were out one evening and decided to stay out after dark. This was in the Atlantic Ocean. Normally, we didn't do this very often, but the sunset was beautiful that evening, filling the sky with the most beautiful shades of pink I had ever seen. Once the sun had set, the moon was also beautiful. There was just something about sitting on a boat in the middle of the water, watching the sky at night. Absolutely mesmerizing. After quite a bit of time had passed by, we finally decided that we didn't feel like actually sleeping in the boat that night. We could have, but as much as I like being out on the ocean, I don't really like sleeping in a rocking boat. I always wake up with a real stiff neck. I just don't enjoy it. I mean, who would really? As I was getting ready to leave though, there was this loud thud and the boat tilted hard in one direction. Our boat was pretty sturdy, and it would have to take a massive hit in order to get shaken so hard. My wife, understandably alarmed, ran over to me and asked what had happened. I told her I had absolutely no idea. It would be a good idea for us to get on our way in case it happened again, though. Immediately, it did. There was another loud thud, and our boat rocked once again. I looked at my wife, and I could tell she was terrified. I was too, but I tried my best not to let it show. The force of these impacts were making me very concerned. Whatever was hitting our boat was hitting it real hard, and that meant it had enough strength to knock a hole in our boat and sink it if we let this go on. Yeah, we had a dinghy, but what good would a dinghy be when some underwater force was capable of knocking our much larger fishing boat over? I got the boat started and we began on our way back. We hadn't been moving for more than 5 minutes when it happened again a third time. Whatever had been hitting us when we were sitting still was now following us, continuing to hit our boat at full force. My wife had tears in her eyes. We were both terrified. After the next hit, we were convinced whatever was doing this was not going to give up. I tried going faster, as fast as I could possibly force the small boat to go. I wasn't sure how much good it would do though. I was worried the momentum of the boat would help those hits from down under cause even more damage. I was scared of the possibility of the speed causing the ship to capsize. To this day, I'm not even sure if this was a real possibility or not, but to an anxiety-riddled mind, it was something I had to think about. By the time we were slammed into for a 6th time, we were both convinced we were going to die that night out there on the ocean. With the sheer force of the hits, we were surprised the boat hadn't sprung a leak yet. Thankfully, it held together. We braced ourselves for another. When 5 minutes passed without another hit, then 10, then half an hour, we stopped. Although we were relieved it had stopped, we didn't relax at all. We remained tense and scared. I didn't even want to look into the water at any point to see what could be causing it. I was scared as to what I might see. The seventh hit never came. We either outran whatever was hitting us, or it just lost interest. We didn't feel safe until we were on dry land, and it was a very long time before we took the boat out again. A lot of our friends don't believe the story. They think we're trying to create a real-life Moby Dick or something. But hey, the ocean is a huge place. The Pacific Ocean alone is larger than the entire land surface of the world. The sheer volume of water and the very fact that life began in the water tells us a few things. There are some very old things in the ocean, and many things we haven't even the slightest idea about. These things have many places to hide out there. I think the scariest thing about the ocean is how much happens out there without you ever knowing and without consequence. That might not make too much sense, but it will after you hear this story of what happened to me. I was out in my boat with a couple of friends, Joe, Wendy, and Tom. We were having a really good day, just enjoying the water. I don't want to give out the location because the situation was way too disturbing, but we had gone pretty far out there. Normally, we wouldn't stay out too long after dark, but we were having such a good time drinking, telling stories, and the sky was so clear and beautiful that we decided to stay a bit longer. If you've never seen the clear sky at night out on the ocean, then I hope you get the chance to sometime. We were up on deck when a sudden flash of light caught our eye. Tom went over to the side of the boat and shined one of the lights in the direction of that flash. When he did, we saw something that really surprised us. There was a much smaller boat out there in the middle of the darkness, and I mean, this was a really small boat. Sort of like a personal motorboat, not the one you would ever expect people to be using except in more shallow water. It was quite a surprise. It seemed to be floating right in our direction, caught adrift. We tried to make contact with the boat. We figured it was unlikely they were using radio, so we used our sound signal to blast 5 short and very quick blasts of sound toward them. The signal tells the other boat that you don't really know what their intent is. I mean, we didn't think they were up to anything bad really, but it was weird to see such a tiny boat that far out and apparently adrift. There was no response at all. We debated about what we should do. Wendy suggested we should just leave it, because whoever it was must have been up to something shady. Tom and I didn't really think that would be the right choice though. Joe wanted to approach the boat, and although I was a bit nervous about the idea, I told him that as long as we kept our distance, we could try and get a closer look at what was going on. We slowly started to approach the tiny boat. We shone our lights, but we were still not getting any sort of response. Even a small motorboat colliding with a much bigger boat like ours could still cause damage, so we had to be very careful approaching. I preferred to get close to it before possibly grabbing it with a beam if needed. I can't tell you the right words to explain how creepy it was in the dark, watching this small boat just slowly coming towards us in the water. We watched as it bobbed up and down with the waves, just a shadow on the vast ocean. We pulled up as close as we were comfortable with. I called out, asking if anyone was in need of assistance. There was no answer, but there was clearly something sitting at the wheel. We told the driver we were going to shine our light over there. This was a precaution so we didn't blind the man. He didn't answer, so we went ahead and did so. As we did though, I realized there was no way the lights could have hurt his eyes in the first place. He didn't have any. All this man had were 2 empty sockets coated with dry and crusty blood. The man was obviously dead. My friends wanted to leave and get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, but I didn't feel right leaving a dead guy out in the middle of the ocean that way. We carefully pulled the boat close to us, and I called the Coast Guard. It took a while, but they came out and got the boat and took us in for some questioning. They were fine with us, not accusing us or anything, but also not telling us much of what they thought either. To this day, I don't know any details of who that man was or what happened to him to make him like that. Honestly, I'm happy I don't. I don't really need to know. I remember the looks of those 2 empty eye sockets as that dead man floated on his boat out on the ocean, a lifeless and directionless captain on a dead vessel. I don't ever need to know anything else about him. I don't think I could handle it. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. It's been a while since my last outro, so I figured I'd do one again. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any constructive criticism you'd like to share with me, be sure to leave it in the comments below. Although I can't respond to every comment I get nowadays anymore, I still do read all of them, and I enjoy hearing your guys' thoughts and opinions, especially of your opinions on the stories in the videos. If you guys have some stories you'd like to share yourselves, please be sure to check in the description below the video. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Be sure to send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a type, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, please be sure to properly format and add as much detail as you feel comfortable with to ensure the most probability your story makes it into a video. I think that's pretty much it for now, though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.